Namaste. Welcome to Beyond the Bindi Hindu Women's Festival 2021. My name is Akshaya, and I'm currently working as a junior doctor in Northampton. My passion is Bharatanatyam, and I was privileged to be able to learn it at a tender age of 5 years old from Singapore. And I was able to complete a diploma with honors as well, the Natya Visharad Title Award in Singapore at the age of 14. Bharatanatyam has been something that has come along with me through my journey. And today I am honored to be able to have a conversation with one of the foremost arts producer and a leading woman in the field of British Indian art scene in the UK here today. So today we're joined by Mira Kaushik OBE, and she's a cross arts producer with more than 30 years of experience in transforming a small arts academy into what is an internationally renowned and award winning production company today. And she's very much responsible for putting the South Asian dance on the map by lobbying and influencing countless committees and boards. And she has inspired and influenced hundreds of artists who has come through the fold of academy and beyond in the UK today. Currently, she's a co founder of Manch UK, a virtual platform found at the height of the pandemic last year with the aim of connecting dancers together, and has seen over 85 artists come together in the last year. So, Namaste, Miraji. It is so lovely to have you on board for this festival today.
Namaste, Akshaya. Namaste. It's a
So,
pleasure to be here.
Miraji, I've heard so much about you since I came to the UK 7 years ago through my own kind of dance journey here. And today, it's to me surreal to have you in this platform with us today. So I'm going to start and go into what inspired you to actually enter the dance space and take up the role that you did in academy over 30 years ago.
Well, it was luck by chance. I didn't sort of really aim to enter the world of dance. I had a history of attending some dance classes as a child, unsuccessfully. Also learning Chow, which was a dance form nobody danced in late 70s. But
Okay.
as a practitioner of theater, I wanted to do new things, and Chow was the newest thing in Delhi, where I come from.
Mhm.
And so when I arrived in London, my first job was at the Commonwealth Institute, where Tara Rajkumar's Academy of Indian Dance was based. And as the first generation young Indian, I was deeply interested in what was happening at Academy of Indian Dance. Academy, even if it was very young, was a very elite and very beautiful organization. So almost sort of 8 years later, when I had an opportunity to apply, I found myself living very close to Academy, and my job then was like 1.5 hour away from my home. So just in order to do a local job, I applied for the job, and I ended up being very lucky because the board had decided not to hire a dancer, and I was the only one non-dancer.
Wow. And I think from our previous conversation, you were at a very young age when you took up the
Yes,
apprenticeship, didn't you?
yes, I was under 30. I was 29 plus. And somebody had told me that, all the achievements come your way before the age of 30, and then you live off them for the rest of the life. So I was very happy that I had sort of achieved in this foreign country. I was already a mother, and I had already, spent, I wouldn't say wasted, but spent few years looking after my baby. So therefore not being very productive on my career front.
Okay.
So that's what happened.
Oh, wow. And Miraji, since you took up that role to be an Indian woman or a Hindu woman in the British art scene and taking that responsibility for, integrating the Indian arts culture into the UK today, what was that journey like over the 30 years?
See, I come from a very religious background. So I grew up in the backdrop of huge amount of rituals and religious activities which were taking place. But as a young girl of the family, I never participated in them. So I imbibed the spirituality of the moment, but not the ritual of the practice.
Mhm.
So when I arrived here, obviously I was newly married, so I had a great trousseau, great collection of beautiful Indian clothes, which my mother had given me. And I arrived with, my two suitcases full of those saris and beautiful blouses and stuffs.
Mhm.
So my exterior was very Hindu. And of course, now we are talking about beyond bindi. So I had a bindi on my forehead.
Of course.
During the earlier years, I had no time to kind of become that Hindu woman, but I looked a Hindu woman, and that sort of obviously created barriers, and also it might have opened few gates for me. I have no recollection of that. But
Mhm.
coming into Britain at a time when multiculturalism was the key word, which meant live and let live, um, I could sort of, establish myself on my own terms. And that was very, very convenient, though I wouldn't sort of deny that I picked up a wardrobe of Western clothes as well, and suits for my interviews.
Mhm.
But my first job was with Festival of India at the Commonwealth Institute. And
Oh.
that meant I I I could be myself, the Indian girl, because I was in the middle of 47 Commonwealth countries
Mhm.
of that time, and later on I think that figure increased. But being Indian, and then sort of I had few spaces where I sort of tried sort of really taking on a Western persona, and coming at Academy of Indian Dance meant I could be here on my terms. So
Ah,
very happily, I sort of really um, lived as I wanted to, and I evolved and I grew with my aesthetic and with myself, and I learned, and I have become myself through a long journey of evolution.
that's inspiring to hear, Miraji. And you talked about your saris and your identity as an Indian or as a Hindu woman. And of course, I have to come to the story of your bindi because I remember seeing you a few years ago from a distance, and the first thing that captivated me about you was your bindi. So, what's the story of your bindi, Miraji?
But Betty has been an interesting part of my persona. I started to wear a bindi at the Lady Shri Ram College, which is the place where I sort of went after my school.
Mhm.
And the aesthetic of that time was hugely inspired by popular sort of really figures, which were semi-intellectual figures of these urban intellectual women slash actors. So a lot of people around me were rural, were ethnic, were that's how everybody dressed, and I, for my looks, which you can see, taking on that rural persona was very easy. So I just sort of wove into kind of cheap cotton saris and bindi, and women of kind of early 80s and late 70s dressed up with a specific aesthetic. Um, I started by kind of really wearing a powdered bindi, which so for wearing a powdered bindi, I would sort of really make a base of Vaseline or lipstick or something around one, and then I would sort of really stick powder onto that. But at times things wouldn't go around, so this would keep on kind of spreading, and then you realize, oh my god, it's bit it's got wonky here, and so you would try to make it kind of, and so this round went on and on, and I have memory of kind of having one big blob on my forehead at times, full of kind of almost looking like Tota's characters, Tamil women, and that's how sort of really I would wear my bindi, and people got used to sort of seeing me in that bindi. So When I arrived in London, I carried on wearing that bindi with my saris and so on, and people just found me strange. But Commonwealth Institute was the right place to kind of, dress up weirdly and still kind of be accepted. But then I had my son, and this baby would sort of, I would carry my baby, put on my bindi, and the first thing what he would do was he would smudge it, he would play with it. So my bindi started to kind of really disappear because I would be red faced because it was this 4 months old or 6 months old baby was playing with my bindi. So then I found kind of really this alternative, which was a sticker. And these stickers were specially made almost 25, 30 years ago,
Okay.
or 35 years ago, actually. And I started to wear them and get them. But by the time I arrived at academy, I could freely sort of happily wear this sticker. And so people sort of really, confused this sticker with my religious, my marital status, my, all sorts of things came on the way, and people would sort of really, um, would just make an impression about what I was, but it was my aesthetic. I thought I looked good wearing this bindi, and I carried on kind of looking like this. In fact, I met um, uh, a great designer during my communal days and institute days. And I asked, he was just wearing something weird. And I asked him, why are you wearing this? So he said, well, I want you to look at me. So I thought that was a good answer for me. So when people would ask me, why do you wear this? Initially, I said, well, I want you to look at me and I want to be noticed. That's why I'm wearing it. And so it was great fun, kind of, to create an interpretation of my bindi where people, I would sort of stay out of this whole idea of having Trinetra, third eye, or married, being married woman, and all those things, or unmarried, or whatever. But then slowly, my bindi got sort of really, while I was working at academy, I got into huge amount of political distress, politics and arts. And that is when I had to sort of go out and fight for organization. And Binti became almost like a symbol of, noticing me where I was standing with my Binti, and a lot of people were really scared of me, and they would. So it almost became like a flag, for me to kind of go and put on, be identified and be noticed. And that politics was very interesting for me to play, really. And I come from the world of theater, and it was very theatrical. And uh, later on, this bindi, as I aged, became lots of other things. When today I have dyed hair, but when my hair are not dyed, people think I'm some kind of a mata, some kind of a divine goddess. And then if I do kind of, my ashirvad, it's suddenly kind of, I have had those moments when suddenly people start to touch my feet. I have to do this. And so, and I still remember sort of really traveling in Bhopal, which is capital of MP, in a car. And a beggar came and said to me, "Oh, Didi, you will become a minister. You will become a minister. Please give me something." Or something was begging. And he was blessing me to become a minister. So he thought I was some kind of a politician. And in the current politics of India, I can be kind of very happily affiliated to the current political party. But also, this Bindi is now confused with the leftist women. So, women actually in Bengal, and women who are associated to leftist party are also, they are addressed as Bindi Brigade. So there are different sort of manifestations of having a bindi, and I really enjoy it. I have the great fun because I'm none of those things.
No, it's really interesting, Miraji. For you, what was signified by this bindi probably had multiple interpretations as people took in their own perceptions, and it must have been a lovely journey to bear witness to those different perceptions over your life.
I really lived with bindi. because bindi is a part of an Indian attire where you wear a sari and you put a matching bindi,
Mhm.
and then when you're not wearing it, you don't. uh, but my bindis have sort of really had played a very important role in my life, and I've enjoyed living with my bindis.
Mhm. No, no, that's wonderful to hear, Miraj. And actually, in your time, so at your time at Academy, so you very much was one of the uh, foremost individuals to very much bring in the Indian arts culture into the space of British arts. And what was that like? You know, bringing the Indian arts in. Was it challenging? Was it something that was welcomed easily? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
See, I had chosen to become director of Academy of Indian Dance, which was a dance organization.
Hmm.
And so dance was the key sort of really tool I could infiltrate into the British society.
Hmm.
It was a medium for me to become part of British society. Another thing about Academy of Indian Dance, which later on became Academy, was that it was an organization which was funded by the taxpayers of um, this country.
Hmm.
And I became right from the beginning, having gone through um, a huge turmoil of saving the organization in the first few months. It was about to die. Um, and that I need to be accountable to the taxpayers of this country, and therefore I need to be relevant to the world I'm living in. I need to be relevant um, to the system. So once you start to play that game of relevance, then you need to sort of really check what exactly is happening and what exactly is the criteria, because you are also fundraising. And then you have to kind of somehow morph yourself to the the priorities of the world you are living in, or you have to kind of really become this chameleon who's sitting on kind of who's an animal and an individual entity, but it's kind of really merging in and becomes part of it. And that was one of the biggest sort of really trick which I created and learned while being at Academy. And therefore, I could very happily sort of really move and navigate within the system and be at par with the best what was happening because I was playing the game. But then it was not necessarily relevant to the world of classical Indian dance, which is very conservative, very traditional. And we have a framework in which the classical art forms work, which is it's oral tradition. You have gurus who dictate everything. All your thinking is kind of really also maneuvered by your gurus. You think like you're supposed to think like them, and you learn and you teach and you perform. But I then kind of, because there was so much happening within the world of dance, that I started to create lots of different opportunities for the dancers, for which initially the sector was not ready. So it was at times it was perceived to be unwanted. It was cumbersome. It was useless. Dancers would say, "Why are we doing this? We don't need to this. We just need to practice, and we need to kind of really." But for whatever I did, it gave a huge amount of employment opportunities for dancers and to explore their own art form. To then, I mean, of course, they made their choices, which were subject to their own learning, their own position. They were first generation dancers, and they were, second and third generation dancers who were also sort of really engaging with the academy. And I very happily created opportunities for everyone, actually.
Okay. That's quite a journey, Miraji, because, like you said, how Indian classical art form over, I guess, the last 100 years, and for those coming from India in the recent times, would have a different perception, and creating the world of opportunity for them to explore their own art form would have been many doors opened for a lot of young dancers in the UK today. And
Yes,
actually,
for example, for example, I was just kind of thinking
Mhm.
of what I did. For example, in early 90s, I'd set up an education and community department at academy. And education and community work for any classical Indian dancer is going into the community and setting up a dance class. And you teach the technique of classical Indian dance, whether it's Bharatanatyam, Kathak, or whatever. But how do you make it relevant to the world you are living in? And I ended up realizing that, in a very cold world where you go to a secondary school where dancers or students are not able to, make an aramandi, you start to teach them tayyamta. It just was not right and relevant. Um, so I suggested that let's bring in folk music into it and popular music into it, so that you're doing one of activity in a school. You cannot make them classical Indian dances. You might as well give them the joy of doing dance rather than the rigor and pain of kind of doing dance, which for which they just there was not going to be any follow up. At the same time, so the moment I brought in popular music into the world of our education and community, which is basically breaking barriers, breaking isolation, having fun with dance, um, I sort of became this person who did not know what Indian dance was meant to do. And now 30 years on, I can kind of very happily see everybody uses accessible music for dance, an accessible dance, which because in a school, unless you're setting up a class. So in your class, if you're teaching classical Indian dance, which is going to take place regularly, you follow the whole tradition, uh, in a systematic way, and you teach that, which is needed. Same thing, going into taking dance into community centers, taking dance into and bringing in different manifestations of dance, such as classical with capital and contemporary with capital. But then you sort of really look at different manifestations of that, which is in traditional classical, contemporary classical. You look at popular classical, or you look at contemporary dance, which is kind of traditional contemporary. And traditional contemporary for me was Uday Shankar, which had existed for 60 years, 80 years in our on. But the modern contemporary or contemporary is everything what the young sort of choreographers from Bangalore are doing. So I was able to sort of really create a structure which I could understand and work appropriately, really, rather than sort of push different things. So over the years, I've realized that there is a huge audience for conservative classical traditional work where dance students and dance teachers teach rigorously and religiously, and that dance happens in the greatest venues which are hired, or the local community venues. And there is an audience of classical Indian dance, and the shows are sold out. And that's as valid as a dancer who's picked up by Sadler's Wells to perform there. Uh, because Sadler's Wells or any venue is actually, at the mercy of the programmer who has likes and dislikes. So I've realized that every kind of dance, what you do, if it needs to be done well, is valid, and it's a very important part of our being.
Absolutely. So you're almost tapping into the core of the purpose of dance. And you use the word joy there to create joy, to create that sense of experience, not just for the dancer, but for the audience, and create
Yeah,
that connection around it. And it's nice to see how you've laid out the different spheres that operate quite in their own bubble, but also, I'm sure, have a little bit of interaction in this kind of
hugely,
ecosystem, isn't it?
hugely, because no matter what sort of dance we picked up, um, the most important thing for me to engage with the dancer was to do with her training of classical Indian dance, because if artists were well trained and grounded in their form, then they could experiment with, with any kind of style, from very contemporary sort of really work to very popular or filmy work.
Okay.
They were fine because once they were confident about what they had learned,
Mhm.
then it was the context in which they were working. It was not, they were not being um, unjust
Mhm.
to their guru.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Miraji, you must have seen so many artists over your time and worked with different artists. So the project that I'm currently working on, or the interest that I'm looking into, is almost this notion of, I guess, femininity and identity through dance. So I'd love to explore this topic of, I guess, gender dynamics in the world of Indian arts, but also in Western arts, because you see that broad brush in your field of work. So could you tell me a little bit about, I guess, in Indian classical dance from your eyes, what's the gender dynamic been in terms of roles, characterizations? Is it something that has strict boundaries around it, or are dancers free to move about? What are your thoughts on that? What's your experience?
I think dancers are free to move out and do whatever they want to do, but the reality is different in the world of classical dance and also in the world of dance in Britain. So I'm thinking of the classical Indian dance where once Devdasis were the superior power and they controlled everything. But the moment they were banned, their sons took over and they became the gurus. So until sort of recent times, most of the classical Indian dance was actually controlled and managed by these gurus who actually were, most of them were children of these women who danced. And then they could sort of really, they could lead and control the development of the dance. But then the moment women sort of really, came into the picture, um, things have changed. But yet, if you really start to talk about the key pillars who are holding dance, there are more men who are given credit than women, actually.
Okay.
The same is in this part of the world. The whole of the dance sector is sort of really is run by women. So there are more women and very few boys. But if you really look at the key choreographers and the biggest name, they are all men.
Mhm.
Settlers' Wealth is a very, very good example of that fiefdom of men. It's led by men, it's controlled by men. They have some token women here and there, but those women also sort of really have to conform to what men are doing. And if you really look at the key British choreographers, there are few women, but more men. And that is how the world operates, sadly.
Okay.
I've been quite kind of fearless in sort of speaking this, and therefore a lot of time I've been shunned by these empires. But I've survived very well without them,
No, of
because
course. And for you to be
yes,
one of the few women, I guess, to be in this field, which is primarily credited to men, is quite inspirational for all of us young women, Miraji. I guess in that light, so that is something, you talked about opportunity and those taking up those roles. If we look at an individual dancer, so if we look at a Bharatanatyam dancer or a Kathak dancer, are they, for example, if I'm a female dancer, am I boxed by my own identity as female when I take up a Bharatanatyam performance, or do I become free to adopt different identities within my own uh, performance? And is that same freedom available to, say, a Western classical dancer, a ballet dancer? Are there any differences or similarities?
I think there are lots of similarities. The most important thing what I have learned is that you do it on your terms and you do it the way you want to do it, and you do it for what you think is right at a time. I'm quite open to the fact that every artist evolves. So today you might sort of really want to do it in one way, but you should not be boxed in that way, because you should be allowed to grow and evolve and become other things. For the dancers, you need to kind of really. be clear about the purpose. I think the biggest sort of really hurdle which comes into the life of a dancer is on two levels. Number one, when you want to apply for a grant. So as long as you are dancing by yourself for your swanta sukhai, as you say, to please yourself, you're doing it on your terms and you're doing it the way you should be doing it at that moment. But the moment you want to apply for a grant to um, get yourself programmed in a circuit of venues. So if there's a dance circuit, so so it's the general process in this part of the world is that you apply for a grant, you apply to Arts Council or your local council, and every council has got a criteria of funding, and then you start to jump the hurdles to prove that you are relevant to those criterias. Then the moment you get the money, then you of course have to show it to the funders that you have performed it in 10 venues or 8 venues or 6 venues. So the moment you start to sort of really approach these venues to say, I'm a dancer, I want to dance in your venue, then you are at the mercy of the venue director, the curator, the programmer. They have a specific liking and choice. So somebody might want to sort of really, hire your performance because you fit into their agenda. And the moment you start to put yourself into the boxes, that's where things start to change. And you may not like doing that, but you end up doing because you want to be there. You want to become part of the mainstream dance scene. So a lot of South Asian dances or Indian classical dances have played that game, fallen flat on their faces, and some of them have succeeded. Some of them are playing that game very well. Some of them have taken very political positions in that to keep sort of really their identities. Uh, um, it's a very mixed sort of really picture. Some of them are doing very well, some of them are not, because some of them are not able to play the game. But the ones who are playing the game are also reaping the benefit of getting funds as well as doing their tours.
Absolutely. So I guess what I've understood from that is almost to be a mainstream dancer in today's society today, one has to not only just understand their own individual sense of dance, but actually understand what the society around them, or that curator or programmer, what they are looking for as well, and really, find the balance and try and interact and integrate between the two, which is something that
See,
I've learned
there
actually.
are also, yes, and there are also sort of key movers and shakers. So you need to kind of really know who is based where. For example, Settlers Wells has got one big name of Bharatnatyam. So it's very important for you to be in the good books of this dancer. His views about your abilities will impact your entry into that venue. So there are few people who have gained tremendous amount of respect by the expectation of excellence, and some of them have not. So it's a mixed bag about also knowing who are the key influencers in the scene and ensuring that you are connected to those influencers, and influencers have great view about your ability.
Okay. Okay. Miraji, okay, we're back. No, so Miraji, that's very interesting to understand actually. And this notion of identity, we are reaching the towards the end of our conversation. But the one thing I'd like to ask is, you mentioned that you're a very spiritual individual. And from my own personal experience of how I've practiced Bharatnatyam, or I've learned Bharatnatyam from my guru, there's a lot of emphasis on that spiritual identity for me. So it's not about me as Akshaya in this body, or me as Akshaya adopting a certain identity, but really connecting on that inner spirituality. And when that spirituality emerges, then I can come out as an artist with that rasa, and I can really feel what I am embodying. And we do that, with such simple things at the start, where we do the namaskar with worshipping or meditating upon Natraj. Those little elements really come in individual dancer experience, and that's how my journey has been in terms of connecting to my spirituality. But in your experience, to what extent is that spirituality still preserved or manifested in the world of Indian classical dance, especially in the UK today?
See, spirituality is a state of mind, I think. And you can be spiritual without connecting with religious discourse. But the religious discourse certainly has a structure, and it certainly gives you a direction to deal with it. My personal view is that we come from a narrative tradition, and language, literature, music, philosophy, everything sort of really combines into visual art, into one form, which is dance. And it is something which certainly has got a process and flow through the narrations which exist within our culture, which are connected to Ramayana and Mahabharata. So there are all the stories which are kind of really, somehow they flow into our cultural and creative life. So, everybody is constructing, carving, narrating stories and responding to those stories. I had a very interesting experience during the earlier stages of my life. I was somewhat 30, 35, and I was trying to narrate this incident where I was invited by London Contemporary Dance Trust to talk about classical Indian dance. And those were my early days. So I was still sort of learning on the job. I mean, I'm still learning, and I have not learned many things. So there are no pretenses. But in that conversation, to a second year contemporary dance student who was European, I said, so the question was, what is the difference between Indian dance and Western contemporary dance? And I said, spirituality. We are spiritual. And he jumped up. And he jumped up and he sort of said, but I feel very spiritual when I'm dancing. That's my spirit and my contemporary practice is it takes me to another level of ecstasy, and I'm spiritually connected to my practice. So, and that sort of moment really I saw his passion, I saw his kind of really at that moment, I still remember he's a very famous choreographer now. His belief in what he was doing and how he was uplifted spiritually. That I realized that I should have said classical Indian dance is connected to religion rather than spirituality. So that's how you get your spirit uplifted, you know, is a process. And I have no problems that you can get that upliftment through your relationship to Natraja, or through your kind of through your ultimate tilana, what you do, which is your technical, physical,
Absolutely.
surrender and offering to the audiences, to the Lord, or to some almighty power.
That's very interesting, Miraji. So this notion of, I guess, what we connect with that is beyond ourself can manifest in
Exactly.
different forms, in different ways. Um, and I guess something that you said, made me want to ask you this one question, which is, Indian classical dance forms have probably come a very long way in time since the beginnings of the Natya Shastra, which was over 3,000 years ago, to where it is today. So, just from your personal perspective, what is it about Indian classical dance form that holds its potential to continue to sustain, through time? Is it something that can sustain? And if so, what is it that makes it sustainable?
See, I I believe that every art form is ever evolving. And classical dance also has ever evolved, as and it is evolving. So what we did 3,000 years ago doesn't happen now. What we did, even sort of in 60s or 80s doesn't happen anymore. It's an oral tradition. A lot of time, all the oral traditions get lost, and once they go, they transfer from bodies to bodies. They manifest differently. I have seen, the same thing happening differently on different bodies, and it also depends upon the intellect of the patrons actually um, who are supporting artists and nurturing artists, and also the tradition. I mean, certainly, with technology and with the modern sort of times, things have changed and evolved, and you're able to have a better grip of what used to happen and what is happening now, and we are able to kind of really identify the changes and evolution quite clearly, which is just great for me, so dance has somehow, in the context of the non-resident Indians, has become almost um, uh, an activity to preserve the culture. So the moment you start, because when you're dancing, you are also learning language, you're learning music, literature, you have knowledge about the religion because there are all religious stories in the tradition. So parents sort of really living outside India
Mm.
are very keen for their children to sort of practice in this um, art form of dancing, which is great for the teachers, for the nurturing of the culture, and for ensuring that the dance survives. But then there is this whole world of professional dancing, professionalization of the dance, which takes it further from a practice of personal kind to putting it onto the stage. And that professionalization is not the priority of our being currently, because you're a doctor and you dance. You will remain a doctor and you'll go and serve the community by actually your medical practice, and you'll continue to dance and grow and nurture yourself um, as a woman, as a dancer. But you may not have in future the kind of time which is required to be a dancer. I've seen several doctors actually practice and create balances within their lives of dancer, being a dancer and a professional practitioner. But it's really hard because the moment life takes over, the moment you have partnerships and children and all of those things which should happen in every human being's life, then you have to prioritize. And that's when the professionalization occasionally goes haywire. So, therefore, the dance which happens on stage outside India, in India, I think we are beginning to get better, but it's not even across the board. Possibly metros, some dance company and dancers in metros, and some of the companies which are nurtured by government have got resources to professionalize, but generally it's accepted to be immature, it's accepted to be out of practice. Dancers come on stage and very politely say, I'm sorry, I'm out of practice, but I'll do my best. And it's not kind of really um, it's not an etiquette of being humble, but actually most of the dancers, a lot of them are out of practice who come on stage and dance and still sort of are accepted. So the cultural attitude, social attitude to dancing needs to be evolved, and it needs to be put in terms of the global dance expectations.
No, that's very true, Miraji. I think, yeah, the what why do we dance, and what is the responsibility of those dancers who join the professional space? I think all of those things are questions that we ought to ask ourselves as well if we wish to preserve these art forms
Yeah.
through time. And I guess the final question that I have for you is, what would your words of wisdom be, if I may, for those young women today, like yourselves, dancer or not, who'd like to enter this world of arts in the UK or even in any other global platform? What would your advice be to those young women?
I think the most important thing is to be yourself. I mean, wisdom. I was never wise. I was thoroughly unwise. So just giving the words of wisdom is it's a joke coming from me. But
Not at
be
all.
yourself. Be yourself. Do it on your terms and believe in yourself. And that is what sort of really brings changes. A lot of time you try to become things which somebody somebody else wants you to become, and that is not very healthy for artists, for people to take on. Do it on your terms. Be yourself. But once you have sort of really taken on, then try and have a vision. Try to kind of really, think about it. Put time into it. Also, look at the ethical frameworks you could create around yourself, and also focus on your development. Continue to grow. Um, be motivated and inspired with what you want to be.
Thank you so much, Miraji. I think in the last 45 minutes or so, we've really journeyed through, I guess, started off with your life, but been able to take that journey on to really explore Indian classical arts and get your perspectives, your experience around this field today. And if I may say so, a field that not many people are exposed to, but we have the potential to really unlock some of the uh, aspects that you and I have had the opportunity to talk about today. So thank you so much for joining us this on this festival, Miraji. And I'm sure many of us young women or even men alike have a lot of food for thought to take from your experiences today. It's been a real
Thank you.
pleasure. And for those of you who've tuned in to this recorded series, please do check out some of the other panels that are taking place across Beyond the Bindis Hindu Women's Festival. There are some incredible conversations over a range of topics, and I'm sure you and I will have lots to be inspired by over the next few days. Dhanyavad and Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you. You just have to remember that I've been an outsider into the world of dance, outsider in the world of creativity, but I did it on my terms, and I think the that is the learning what I've had in my life.
Absolutely, Miraji. Thank you so much.